Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Glad you're here today because we've got something special lined up. Today's video is all about the unexplainable events and things people witness as private detectives. Here are 6 consecutive stories that'll take you through thrilling real cases that came across my desk during my private investigation. Stories I've kept to myself for far too long. Some of them still keep me up at night. So get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's dive into the first case. And if you enjoy what you hear today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like these. Story 1. The Basement Tenant. Here's something most people don't know in any given city. There are hundreds of illegal basement apartments that no government agency has on record, places where landlords rent out spaces that were never meant to house human beings. And sometimes, people disappear into those spaces. This case came to me through a woman named Patricia Lim in the fall of 2019. She found me through my website, one of those generic pie sites that promises discretion and results. Patricia's brother, Daniel, had stopped answering his phone 3 weeks earlier. The police wouldn't file a missing persons report because Daniel was 34 years old, had a history of depression, and had apparently sent his sister a text saying he needed space. But Patricia knew something was wrong. Tree knew her brother. I met Patricia at a coffee shop in Flushing, Queens. She was a school teacher, mid-40s, with tired eyes that told me she hadn't been sleeping. She showed me the last text from Daniel's phone. It was sent at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Just 2 words: need space. Daniel never texted like that, Patricia said. No punctuation, no context. And he always signed his texts with a dash and his initial. Always. Since we were teenagers. I took the case for half my usual rate. Something about Patricia's certainty made me believe her. Daniel's last known address was a house in Elmhurst, a 3-story Victorian that had been converted into apartments. The landlord, a man named Victor Rostov, was cooperative when I called. He confirmed that Daniel Lim had been renting the basement apartment for 7 months. Paid in cash, kept to himself. He moved out 3 weeks ago, Rostov told me over the phone. His accent thick and Eastern European. Middle of the night, took his things. Left keys on kitchen counter. I asked if I could see the apartment. Rostov hesitated, then agreed. Come tomorrow, 11 o'clock. The house looked normal enough in daylight. Well-maintained, painted a cheerful yellow. Rostov met me at the door, a large man in his 60s with mechanic's hands and suspicious eyes. He led me around the side of the house to a separate entrance, a door that opened onto a steep staircase descending into darkness. The basement apartment was exactly what you'd expect. Low ceilings, small windows near the ceiling that let in minimal light, the persistent smell of mildew. 1 bedroom, a cramped bathroom, a kitchenette. Clean, but depressing. You see, Rostov said, nothing here. He left. But I noticed something immediately. The windows, those small rectangular windows near the ceiling, had been covered from the outside with black plastic. Not from the inside where a tenant might want privacy. From the outside. Why are the windows blocked? I asked. Rostov shrugged. Previous tenant did that. Daniel never asked me to remove. I walked around the apartment slowly. In the bedroom, there were still indentations in the carpet where furniture had been. The pattern suggested a bed, a dresser, and something else, something heavy in the corner. I knelt down and ran my hand over the carpet. It was cleaner in the indented areas than the surrounding carpet, as if someone had scrubbed those specific spots. In the bathroom, the shower drain caught my attention. The metal grate was newer than the rest of the fixtures, much newer. I tried to unscrew it, but Rostov stepped forward. That's enough, he said. You see apartment? Your client's brother is not here? I thanked him and left, but I sat in my car down the street for the next 4 hours. Rostov left at 2 p.m. No one else came or went. At dusk, I approached the basement apartment again. The door was locked, but the lock was cheap. I was inside in under a minute. With my flashlight, the apartment felt different. Colder. I went straight to the bathroom and removed the shower drain cover. I had to use a wrench from my car, but it came free. Beneath it, caught in the pipe trap, was a clump of dark hair, human hair, and something else, a small silver earring. I photographed everything, replaced the drain cover, and left. Patricia confirmed that Daniel had his ear pierced. She sent me a photo, and the earring matched. The next part is where this case turns from missing persons to something else entirely. I contacted a friend in the NYPD, Detective Sarah Brennan, showed her what I'd found. She agreed to request a wellness check, which gave her grounds to enter the property legally. What they found wasn't in the basement apartment. Behind a false wall in Rostov's own bedroom on the 3rd floor, they found a soundproofed room, 8 feet by 10 feet, and no windows. A single bare mattress on the floor, restraints bolted to the walls, and a camera mounted in the corner, still recording. The footage showed Daniel Lim had been held in that room for 6 months. Rostov had been renting the basement apartment to vulnerable people, people with few family connections, people who wouldn't be missed immediately. Then he'd drug them, move them upstairs, and keep them in that room. There were 4 victims before Daniel. The police found remains in Rostov's storage unit in New Jersey. Daniel was found alive 3 days after the raid, wandering near the George Washington Bridge. Had no memory of escaping or how he got there. The doctors said it was trauma-induced dissociation. He spent 8 months in psychiatric care. Text to Patricia hadn't come from Daniel. Rostov had sent it from Daniel's phone after taking him upstairs. A simple message to buy time. Patricia sent me a thank you card after the trial. Rostov got life without parole. She wrote that Daniel was living with her now, doing better, seeing a therapist twice a week. She never mentioned the money she owed me for the case. I never asked for it. But here's what stayed with me, what I think about late at night. Rostov's house had 3 apartments. 2 other tenants lived there during the 6 months Daniel was upstairs. They lived normal lives, came and went, slept in their beds at night. And less than 20 feet above or below them, Daniel was locked in a soundproofed room, begging into a camera that no one was watching. How thin are the walls between normal life and absolute horror? How many people pass by suffering every single day and never know it? If this story made an impact on you, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like this video. And if you want to hear more cases like this one, subscribe to the channel. There are 5 more stories coming up, and I promise you, they only get stranger from here. Story 2. The Photograph Collector. Here's a disturbing statistic. Experts estimate that at any given time, there are between 25 and 50 active serial killers operating in the United States. Most of them are never caught. They die of natural causes, their crimes undiscovered, their victims unidentified, and some of them hide in plain sight, collecting trophies. In the spring of 2021, I received a call from a man named Eric Holder. He explained that his grandmother, Dorothy, had recently passed away at the age of 92, while clearing out her house in Astoria. He and his family had found something disturbing in her attic, a wooden trunk containing approximately 200 photographs of young women. None of them were family members. None of the women in the photos were smiling. They all looked terrified, Eric said on the phone. There's something written on the back of each photo. The police told Eric there was nothing they could do. Old photographs weren't evidence of a crime. Dorothy had been a recluse for the last 30 years of her life, living alone in a house she'd inherited from her husband. She had no criminal record. Without a specific crime to investigate, the police couldn't help. That's where I came in. Eric hired me to find out where the photographs came from and if any of the women could be identified. He needed to know if his grandmother had been involved in something terrible. I met Eric at Dorothy's house on a Wednesday afternoon. The house was a narrow 2-story building crammed between similar houses on a quiet residential street. Inside, everything was frozen in time, furniture from the 1960s yellowed wallpaper, the smell of old books and dust. Eric led me to the attic. The trunk sat in the center of the floor, already open. I put on latex gloves before touching anything. The photographs were organized chronologically, oldest at the bottom. They dated from 1953 to 1981. All featured young women, ages roughly 18 to 30. They were Polaroids or standard photo prints, slightly faded but well preserved. And Eric was right, not one woman was smiling. Most looked directly at the camera with expressions ranging from fear to resignation to defiance. On the back of each photo was written a date, a first name, and a number. For example, June 12, 1967, Sarah -34. I photographed every single picture, front and back, creating a digital archive, and I began the tedious process of research. The first break came when I ran the dates and names through newspaper archives. I was looking for missing persons reports that matched. On July 3, 1967, a woman named Sarah Kellerman was reported missing in Philadelphia. She was 28 years old, last seen leaving her job at a department store. She was never found. The photo dated June 12, 1967, labeled Sarah 234, matched her description. Over the next 3 weeks, I identified 17 of the women from the photographs. All had been reported missing across different East Coast cities between 1953 and 1981. All had disappeared without a trace. The cases had never been connected because this was before digital databases and insurgency communication. But here's where it gets complicated. Dorothy couldn't have been the killer. In 1953, when the first photo was taken, Dorothy was only 24 years old and living in Boston with her first husband, Frank Holder, Eric's grandfather. According to family records and Eric's own memories, Dorothy had been a quiet, unremarkable woman who worked as a librarian for 40 years. She had no history of violence, no connection to any of the cities where the women disappeared. I needed to understand Dorothy's timeline. I requested her full biography from Eric, every address, every job, every known associate. That's when I found the connection. Frank Holder. Frank had been a traveling salesman from 1951 until his death in 1982. He sold medical supplies and covered a territory that included Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Baltimore, and Richmond. I cross-referenced his sales routes with the dates and locations of the disappearances. Perfect matches. Every single time a woman disappeared, Frank Holder had been in that city on business. But Frank had died 40 years ago. Natural causes. Heart attack at age 53. I obtained his death certificate. Everything appeared legitimate, and I looked at the photos again, specifically at the numbers. Sarah was number 34. I counted the photos. There were 197 in total. The numbers ranged from 1 to 197. Frank Holder had killed 197 women over 28 years. The photographs were trophies, but they were more than that. I noticed that the photos were taken in the same location. The background was always the same nondescript white wall with the same light fixture partially visible in the upper corner. After studying them for hours, I realized the location had to be somewhere in Dorothy's house. The light fixture matched fixtures in her basement. Eric and I went to the basement together. It had been renovated sometime in the 1980s. New drywall, new flooring, new lighting. But in the far corner, behind a shelving unit, we found it. The wall had been repainted, but the old light fixture was still there, now disconnected and covered by a newer fixture. The women had been photographed here, in this basement, Dorothy's house. She knew, Eric said quietly. She had to know, but I wasn't certain. Not yet. I dug deeper into Dorothy's life after Frank's death. She had retired from the library immediately after he died. She stopped socializing entirely. According to neighbors I interviewed, she became paranoid and reclusive almost overnight. One neighbor remembered Dorothy burning a large pile of papers in her backyard in the summer of 1982, just weeks after Frank's funeral. I believe Dorothy found the photographs after Frank died. She realized what her husband had been for nearly 3 decades, and instead of going to the police, she kept his secret. Maybe out of shock, maybe out of shame, maybe out of some twisted sense of loyalty. She hid the photos in her attic and spent the last 40 years of her life living with that knowledge. The question I asked Eric was this: do we go public? Going public would give closure to 17 families. It would also destroy Dorothy's memory and subject Eric's family to intense scrutiny and judgment. Some of the victims' families might sue. The media would be relentless. Eric struggled with the decision for 2 weeks. Finally, he decided to contact the FBI. They took the photographs, confirmed my research, and officially connected 17 cold cases to Frank Holder. The FBI held a press conference. Eric's family was mentioned, but not vilified. Most of the focus was on the victims and the decades-long mystery finally being solved. But here's what haunts me about this case. There were 197 photographs. Only identified 17 women. That means 180 families still don't know what happened to their daughters, sisters, mothers. Some of those families are probably still looking, still wondering, still hoping. And the only person who could have identified those women was Frank Holder, who died 40 years ago. The FBI is still working on identifications, using age progression software and forensic genealogy. But most of those women will remain nameless. And Dorothy lived in that house for 40 years with those photographs above her head. Every day, knowing what Frank had done. Every day, choosing silence. I think about her sometimes, alone in that house, surrounded by the ghosts of 197 women. Wonder if she slept at night. If you're finding these stories compelling, please take a second to like this video. Subscribe if you want to hear more. We've got 4 more stories to get through. And trust me, the next one is even more unsettling. Story 3. The Listener. Here's something they don't tell you in private investigator training. Some cases don't want to be solved. They push back. They resist. And sometimes they follow you home. This case came to me in an unusual way. In December 2018, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a check for $5,000 made out to me, and a single piece of paper with an address written on it. 1847 Riverside Drive, Apartment 4C. Nothing else. No name, no explanation, no instructions. I should have refused the case. I should have shredded the check. But $5,000 is $5,000, and I was curious. The address was in Washington Heights, an older building facing the Hudson River. I drove there on a Tuesday morning and talked my way past the building super by claiming I was looking into a tenant complaint. He let me in and told me that 4C had been vacant for 3 months. Tenant broke his lease, the super said. Guy named Andrew Voss. Nice enough, quiet, paid rent on time. Then one day he just left. Didn't even take his furniture. Said we could keep his deposit. Just wanted out of the lease immediately. I asked if I could see the apartment. The super was reluctant, but another $20 convinced him. Apartment 4C was a studio with a nice view of the river. It was, as the super had said, still fully furnished. A couch, a bed, a small dining table. Bookshelves lined one wall. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. What struck me immediately was the silence. Not just quiet silence. It's a kind of deep, oppressive silence that makes your ears ring. I could hear my own heartbeat. I walked through the apartment slowly. The books on the shelves were mostly philosophy and physics textbooks. There was a laptop on the desk, closed. I opened it, dead battery, no charger in sight. In the kitchenette, the refrigerator was empty and unplugged. Then I noticed the walls. At first I thought they were covered in a textured wallpaper, but looking closer I realized the entire apartment, every single wall. The ceiling, even the inside of the closet door, was covered in tiny writing, handwritten, in black ink. No spaces between words, no punctuation, just continuous text spiraling and overlapping, covering every surface. I took out my phone and photographed several sections, then tried to read them. The writing was obsessive, repetitive, and deeply disturbing. Inden. Salwas besteffentinsen, Snotzelin seed twis witten, Salwas waiting. It went on like that. Thousands upon thousands of words, maybe millions, covering approximately 800 square feet of wall space. It would have taken weeks, maybe months, to write all of it. I asked the super about Andrew Voss. He told me Voss had been a grad student at Columbia, studying acoustics or something like that. Quiet guy, early 30s, no visitors. He'd lived in the apartment for 2 years before suddenly breaking his lease. Did he seem unstable? I asked. The super shook his head. Not at all. That's what was weird. He was always polite, always coherent. Then one day he knocks on my door and says, "I need to leave today. I'll forfeit my deposit. I just need out." His hands were shaking and he kept looking over his shoulder. I asked if someone was bothering him, if he needed me to call the cops. He just said it's not a person. Then he left. I spent an hour in that apartment, photographing the walls, trying to find any pattern or meaning in the text. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. Voss wrote about something that listened, something that lived in silence and fed on sound. He described hearing things that shouldn't be possible, conversations from other apartments that weren't happening, sounds from the river that were too clear, too focused. He wrote about how the thing would take sounds away, leaving pockets of absolute silence that felt wrong, felt hungry. The last section I photographed, written near the front door, was different. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. If you're reading this, it heard you reading it, knows you now. It'll follow the sound of your voice back to wherever you came from. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have burned this place down. But I was too afraid to make that much noise. I'm leaving this for whoever is stupid enough to come looking. I'm sorry I left the apartment. The super was waiting in the hall. You find what you were looking for? He asked. I told him someone had hired me to check on Voss, and I'd need to find him. The super gave me the forwarding address. Voss had left a P.O. box in Vermont. I sent a letter to the P.O. box explaining who I was and that I'd been hired to investigate his apartment. I included my contact information. 3 weeks passed with no response. Then, late one night in January, Voss called me. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been crying or screaming. You went into the apartment, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Did you read the walls? Some of it? A long silence. Then, it's already started for you, hasn't it? You've noticed the silences? He was right.
Oh.
Over the past 3 weeks, I had noticed something. Moments where all sound seemed to drop away, not gradually, but instantly, like someone had pressed a mute button on reality. These moments lasted only a few seconds, but they were becoming more frequent. And during those moments, I felt watched. What is it? Voss laughed bitterly. I don't know. I was studying acoustic phenomena, specifically unexplained sounds in urban environments. I set up recording equipment in my apartment, trying to capture the hum that some people report hearing. Instead, I captured something else. Gaps. Moments where the audio just stops. Complete silence. No ambient noise, no background hum, nothing. Like someone cut holes in the sound itself. That could be equipment malfunction, I said. That's what I thought. So I got better equipment, more sensitive. That's when I started hearing it. Hearing what? The listening. During those silent moments, if you're very still, very quiet, you can hear it. Right? Something paying attention. Something enormous and patient and hungry. It listens to the sounds we make, and when we're silent, it fills that silence with itself. And once it knows you exist, once you've acknowledged it, it doesn't stop. It follows you. Waits for you to be quiet. I wanted to tell Voss he'd had a breakdown, that he needed psychiatric help, but the silences were real. I had experienced them. What do I do? I asked. Noise, Voss said immediately. Constant noise. I sleep with 3 radios on, different stations. Yeah. I wear earplugs under headphones playing white noise. I never let myself be somewhere truly quiet. It can't come through if there's no silence for it to fill. That's not sustainable. I know, but the alternative is letting it in. If you let it in, if you sit in true silence and wait for it, You'll hear what it sounds like when something infinite tries to squeeze itself into the shape of a sound your ears can process. That's what drove me out of the apartment. I made the mistake of sitting in silence one night, just to prove to myself that I was being irrational. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, and then I heard it. Listening, breathing, thinking, all at once. A sound that was also a presence. I ran. I've been running ever since. He gave me one more piece of advice. Don't try to investigate further. Don't go back to the apartment. Don't sit in silence and burn any notes you took. It can follow the pattern of your attention. I didn't burn my notes. I'm a private investigator. Documentation is everything. But I did start sleeping with a fan on. And I stopped meditating, stopped enjoying quiet mornings, stopped doing anything that involved prolonged silence. The silences still happen sometimes, moments where everything stops. And during those moments, yes, I hear something. A quality to the silence that feels aware, attentive, hungry. I never found out who sent me that check or why they wanted me to investigate apartment for C. The check cleared. I kept the money. Probably shouldn't have. 3 months ago, I drove past that building in Washington Heights just out of curiosity. As the super was outside smoking a cigarette, I stopped and asked about apartment for C. Rented it out, he said. A nice couple, just moved in last month. I almost warned them, almost went up and told them to leave. But what would I say? That the apartment is haunted by silence. That something listens when you're quiet. They'd think I was insane. So I drove away. Sometimes I think about that couple. I wonder if they've noticed the silences yet. I wonder if they've started writing on the walls. If you're still listening to these stories, I appreciate it. Please like this video if you're enjoying it, and subscribe for more. We're halfway through now, with 3 more stories to go. Now, try not to think too hard about the silence between words. Story 4. The Exchange Student. Here's a fact that'll make you paranoid. Identity theft is the easiest crime to commit and one of the hardest to prosecute. People steal identities every single day. But most of the time, they're stealing credit card numbers or social security numbers. This case was different. This was someone stealing an entire life. In August 2020, during the height of the pandemic, I got a video call from a woman named Helen Park. She was calling from Seoul, South Korea, and she was desperate. Her daughter Julie had been an exchange student at NYU for the past year. Julie had returned to Seoul in March when the pandemic started, but she'd left some belongings in her shared apartment in Brooklyn. Helen had been trying to arrange for the items to be shipped, but Julie's roommate, a woman named Mara Volkov, wasn't responding to emails or calls. "I think something's wrong," Helen said. Julie called the apartment last week, and someone answered. A woman. She said she was Julie Park, and that she'd never had a roommate named Mara. That got my attention. Helen hired me to check on the apartment and retrieve Julie's belongings. She was particularly worried about Julie's laptop, which contained years of schoolwork and family photos. The apartment was in Greenpoint, a converted warehouse building with industrial aesthetics. I spoke with the building manager first, confirmed that apartment 12F was currently occupied by one tenant, Julie Park. There was no Mara Volkov on the lease. But the apartment was definitely shared, he said. I saw both girls multiple times. A Korean girl and a white girl, Eastern European accent. I knocked on apartment 12F. A young Asian woman answered. She looked to be in her early 20s, wearing glasses and an IU sweatshirt. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for Mara Volkov," I said. She shook her head. "No one by that name lives here. It's just me, Julie Park." Her English was perfect, but carried a slight accent. I showed her a photo of the real Julie Park that Helen had sent me. The woman in front of me looked similar. Same age, same general features, same build. But it wasn't the same person. "This is an old photo," the woman said quickly. "I've changed my hair. Can I help you with something?" I explained that I was a private investigator hired by Helen Park to retrieve her daughter's belongings from the apartment. The woman's expression didn't change. "I don't know who hired you, but I'm Julie Park. I don't know anyone named Helen. I think you have the wrong apartment." She tried to close the door. I put my foot in the way. "I'm going to call the police," she said. "Please do. They'll want to see your ID." For just a moment, I saw panic in her eyes, and she composed herself. "Fine, wait here." She closed the door. I heard movement inside the apartment, drawers opening, things being moved. After a minute, I knocked again. No answer. I called the building manager and explained the situation. He came up with a master key, and we entered together. The apartment was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, nothing. Just bare walls and floors. The windows were open. The fire escape was accessible. She'd run. But she'd left something behind. In a rush, she'd dropped a wallet near the window. I picked it up with a latex glove. Inside was a New York State driver's license with Julie Park's name and date of birth. But the photo was of the woman who'd just fled. Also in the wallet, a South Korean passport, also in Julie Park's name, with the wrong photo. Applied. Pie-eyed. Helen was quiet for a long moment. "That's Mara," she finally said. "That's Julie's roommate. She's pretending to be Julie." The building manager and I checked the apartment more thoroughly. In a trash can in the bathroom, we found torn-up photographs. I took them with me and spent that evening piecing them together. There were photos of the real Julie Park and Mara Volkov together at the apartment, around NYU at various New York landmarks. In every photo, Mara was studying Julie. Not the camera, not the scenery, Julie. Her posture, her expressions, the way she smiled. I contacted NYPD and filed a report for identity theft and fraud. Then I started digging into Mara Volkov's background. According to NYU records, Mara had been an exchange student from Estonia. She'd shared the apartment with Julie for 7 months before Julie left for Seoul in March. But when I contacted the University of Tallinn, which had supposedly sent Mara to NYU, they had no record of her. The student visa in her name was fake. Mara Volkov wasn't a real person. Over the next week, I traced Mara's activities. Using Julie's identity, she'd opened 3 credit cards, applied for student loans, and enrolled in online classes at NYU for the fall semester. She'd also applied for remote internships at 2 tech companies, using Julie's academic credentials. The scariest part? She'd been planning this since before the pandemic. I found rental applications from February 2020 where Mara had tried to rent a new apartment under Julie Park's name. The landlords had rejected the applications because the credit checks showed some discrepancies. But with a few more months to perfect the identity theft, she would have succeeded. I asked Helen to have Julie check her bank accounts from Seoul. Someone had been systematically withdrawing small amounts, $50 here, $100 there. Since April, nothing large enough to trigger alerts. But over 4 months, nearly $8,000 had been taken. The NYPD tracked Mara's movements using security camera footage. She'd left the building via the fire escape and taken the subway to a hostel in Lower Manhattan. By the time police arrived at the hostel, she was gone. The hostel clerk remembered her checking in under yet another name, Sarah Chen, with an ID that matched. Then the case took an even darker turn. While investigating Mara's background, I found social media accounts she'd maintained before coming to New York. Photos of her living in Montreal, supposedly as a student at McGill University, but McGill had no record of her either. And in those Montreal photos, I noticed something. She was photographed with another young woman, Asian, similar age and build to Julie. The two were roommates. I contacted Montreal police, had a missing persons report filed in 2018 for a Chinese exchange student named Li Wei who had been studying at McGill. Li Wei had last been seen at the apartment she shared with a roommate, a woman matching Mora's description, who had given the name Alina Kosov. After Li Wei disappeared, Alina had also vanished. Li Wei's family had filed reports about strange financial activity after she went missing. Someone had been using Li Wei's identity to open accounts, apply for jobs, and eventually enroll at NYU. I realized what had been happening. Mara, or whatever her real name was, had been moving across North America, stealing identities from young immigrant women. She'd befriend them, become their roommate, learn everything about them, and then I didn't want to think about what happened next. But the pattern was clear. Li Wei had disappeared, and then Li Wei had applied to NYU. After that identity became problematic, she'd found Julie Park and started the process again. The investigation expanded. Police in Montreal, New York, and Interpol started coordinating. They found evidence of similar cases going back to 2014 in Toronto, Ottawa, and Boston. Always the same pattern. Young immigrant women, usually exchange students, would take on a roommate matching Mara's description. Several months later, the original woman would disappear and the roommate would vanish shortly after. 7 potential victims across 6 years. The big break came in October 2020. A Border Patrol agent in Vermont stopped a woman trying to cross into Canada using a stolen identity. The woman matched Mara's description. She had identification for 3 different people in her bag. Her real name was Katerina Sobel. She was 36 years old, not 22. She was originally from Ukraine but had been moving across North America since 2013, stealing identities and disappearing when each identity became too risky to maintain. Under interrogation, Katerina admitted to identity theft but refused to discuss what had happened to the missing women. Her lawyer argued that there was no evidence of foul play, only financial crimes. That's where the case stands today. Katerina Sobel is serving 7 years for identity theft and fraud. The FBI is still investigating the disappearances of Li Wei and 6 other women. But without bodies or direct evidence, they haven't been able to charge her with anything more serious. Julie Park was lucky. She left New York before Katerina could complete the process. Helen asked me what I thought Katerina had been planning. I didn't tell her the truth. But I'll tell you based on the pattern. I believe Katerina would have eventually killed Julie and then lived as Julie Park for several years until that identity became too risky. Then she'd find another vulnerable young woman and start again. The scariest part of this case is how easy it was for Katerina to slip between identities. She found women who were far from home, isolated, trusting. She became their friend, learned their mannerisms, their stories, their passwords, and then she became them. Sometimes I wonder how many women like Katerina are out there right now, living as someone else, slowly erasing the people they're pretending to be. If these stories are keeping you engaged, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are 2 more stories left, and they're the ones that affected me the most. Let's continue. Story 5. The Memory House. Here's a question that sounds philosophical but isn't. Can a place remember? Not in a metaphorical sense. Can physical space retain impressions of what happened there? I never believed it could. This case changed my mind. In June 2022, I was hired by a law firm representing the estate of Margaret Finch, an elderly woman who died at the age of 97. Margaret had owned a house in Cold Spring, New York for 60 years. The house was now being sold, but there was a problem. Every potential buyer who toured the property withdrew their offer within 24 hours. No explanation. They just changed their minds. The real estate agent suspected something was wrong with the house itself. She hired me to spend a night there and see if I could identify the problem. Maybe there was a gas leak causing hallucinations, or carbon monoxide, or some structural issue that was subconsciously disturbing people. I arrived at the house on a Thursday evening in late June. It was a beautiful Victorian, well-maintained, painted a soft blue with white trim. 3 stories, wraparound porch, gardens that had clearly been loved. The kind of house that should sell in a weekend. The real estate agent, Monica, met me there with the keys. She seemed nervous. "I've sold houses for 20 years, she said. "I've never seen anything like this. Normal families, investors, even a developer, they all tour the house, seem interested. And then they call me the next day and withdraw. When I ask why, they get uncomfortable. One woman told me the house felt too full. That's all she'd say. Monica left me with the keys and a file containing Margaret Finch's obituary and property records. The house was furnished exactly as Margaret had left it. Her family had taken personal items and valuables, but the furniture, books, and everyday objects remained. The lawyer had explained that Margaret's will specified the house be sold as is with all furnishings included. I walked through each room systematically, taking notes. Living room, floral couch, matching armchairs, coffee table with coasters. Dining room, table set for 6, china cabinet full of dishes, kitchen, spotlessly clean, vintage appliances. A calendar on the wall stopped at March 2022, the month Margaret died. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. I went upstairs. 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. The master bedroom was clearly Margaret's, a large bed with a handmade quilt, nightstand with reading glasses and a bookmark in a closed book. I picked up the book. It was a mystery novel, stopped 3/4 of the way through. Margaret had died before finishing it. The 2nd bedroom was set up as a guest room. The 3rd bedroom was different. It was a child's room decorated for a little girl. Pink walls, white furniture, stuffed animals arranged on the bed. A bookshelf filled with children's books. Small desk with coloring books and a cup of crayons. Everything was immaculate, preserved, untouched by time. I checked the property records. Margaret had never had children. She'd lived alone since her husband died in 1987. I took photos and continued my investigation. In the basement, I found boxes of old photographs. I spent an hour going through them. Pictures of Margaret and her husband, Walter, throughout the decades. Their wedding in 1952, vacations, holidays, but no children ever. As evening turned to night, I settled into the living room with my laptop and notes. The house was quiet, peaceful even. I didn't understand what was disturbing the potential buyers, and around 10 p.m., I heard it, soft footsteps upstairs. Froze. I was supposed to be alone in the house. The footsteps were light, deliberate, moving from one room to another. A child's footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight and went upstairs. The hallway was empty. All 3 bedroom doors were closed, exactly as I'd left them. Checked each room. Nothing. No one. I returned to the living room, telling myself it was old house sounds, settling wood, my imagination. At 10:15, I heard a different sound. A child laughing. Distant, muffled, but unmistakable. It was coming from upstairs. I went back up. This time, the door to the child's bedroom was open. I had definitely closed it. I stepped inside. Everything looked the same, but the air felt different. Warmer. Lived in. And there was a smell I hadn't noticed before. Baby powder and crayons. On the small desk, one of the coloring books was open. I was certain it had been closed when I'd checked the room earlier. I approached slowly. The coloring book was open to a half-finished page, a drawing of a house with flowers. The crayons looked freshly used. I heard breathing behind me. I spun around. The room was empty. But the breathing continued. Soft, steady, the breathing of a sleeping child. I left the room quickly and closed the door. My hands were shaking. Over the next hour, I experienced things I still can't rationally explain. I heard a woman singing a lullaby. I smelled dinner cooking, pot roast and vegetables. I heard conversations, muffled but distinct, coming from rooms that were empty when I checked them. The house was full. That's the only way I can describe it. Full of moments, memories, impressions of life, but not Margaret's life. At midnight, I was sitting in the living room trying to decide whether to leave when I heard the front door open and close. Footsteps in the hallway. A man's footsteps. "Margaret." "I'm home," a man's voice called out. Warm, tired, the voice of someone returning from work. I stood up. The hallway was empty. But I heard him moving through the house, hanging up a coat, setting down keys. The sounds were crystal clear. Then I heard Margaret's voice, younger than the elderly woman who died at 97. "Dinner's almost ready, Walter. How was your day?" I was listening to a memory, a moment from decades ago, playing out in the space where it had originally happened. The conversation continued. Walter talked about work. Margaret talked about her day. They discussed mundane things, groceries needed, a leaking faucet, plans for the weekend. It was intimate, domestic, real, and then I heard the third voice. "A little girl, Daddy. You're home." The sound of running feet. A child rushing to embrace her father. But Margaret never had children. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked in the driveway. I couldn't stay in that house. Not because it was threatening, it wasn't. It was the opposite. The house was so full of love, of family, of life that had never actually happened, that it was unbearable. The next morning, I went back to the law firm with my report. I told them the house had no structural issues, no gas leaks, nothing dangerous. But I also told them the truth. The house was experiencing some kind of phenomenon I couldn't explain. Potential buyers were sensing it, even if they didn't understand what they were sensing. The lawyer, an older man named Richard Moss, listened to my report without interruption. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I need to show you something," he finally said. He pulled out a file. Inside were medical records from Margaret Finch from 1958. She'd been pregnant, 7 months along. But the baby's name had already been chosen. Eleanor. Margaret had lost the baby, stillborn, a little girl. "Margaret never spoke about it," Richard said. "But Walter's family told me years ago that Margaret had struggled afterward. She decorated a nursery and never dismantled it. She'd sometimes talk about Eleanor as if she were real. Walter indulged it at first, thinking it was grief, but it never stopped. For 60 years, Margaret lived in that house believing she'd raised a daughter who never existed. The medical records showed something else. After Eleanor's death, Margaret had suffered a severe psychological break. The doctor's notes described elaborate delusions involving a full life with her daughter. First steps, first words, school days, graduations. Margaret's mind had created an entire lifetime for the child she'd lost. And somehow, over 60 years of believing, imagining, remembering, Margaret had imprinted those false memories onto the house itself. The house remembered Eleanor, remembered the life that Margaret had imagined for her. And now, anyone sensitive enough could experience those memories, the footsteps, the laughter, the childhood that had never been real. Richard asked me what he should do. I told him the truth. Sell it to someone who wouldn't mind. Someone who'd appreciate a house full of love, even if that love was for a ghost that had never lived. They eventually sold it to a writer who'd heard about the house's history. She lives there now. I contacted her 6 months ago just to check in. She said the house is peaceful. She still hears Eleanor sometimes playing in her room, laughing in the garden, but it doesn't frighten her. It's like living in someone else's dream, she told me. A happy dream. There are worse things. I suppose she's right. But I think about Margaret sometimes, spending 60 years in that house, talking to a daughter who never drew breath, cooking meals for a family that existed only in her mind. The line between memory and delusion, between what happened and what we wish had happened, is thinner than we'd like to believe. And sometimes, if we want something badly enough, if we believe in it deeply enough, maybe we can make it real at least. Real enough to leave an impression. If you're still with me, thank you for listening. Please like this video if these stories are resonating with you. We've got one final story, and it's the one that made me question whether I should stay in this line of work. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more cases like these. Let's finish this. Story 6. The exit interview. Here's a statistic that should terrify you. The average person spends 90,000 hours of their life at work. 90,000 hours in offices, warehouses, stores. Around the same people, day after day, year after year. You'd think you'd get to know them. You'd think you'd notice if something was wrong. This final case came to me in September 2023, and it's the reason I'm very careful about the jobs I take now. A woman named Rebecca Torres contacted me through my website. She worked in HR for a mid-sized insurance company in Manhattan. The company, which I'll call Meridian Insurance, occupied 3 floors of an office building in Midtown. Rebecca's concern was straightforward. Over the past 18 months, 8 employees had resigned with no notice. They'd simply stopped coming to work. No emails, no calls, no explanations. They'd all left personal items in their cubicles, photos, mugs, sweaters, as if they'd stepped out for lunch and never come back. HR policy requires exit interviews, Rebecca explained during our first meeting. But none of these people completed them. They won't return our calls or emails. We've sent final paychecks to their homes, but several have been returned as undeliverable. It's like they've vanished. She showed me a list of names. 8 people over 18 months. It's all different departments, different ages, different roles. The only commonality, they'd all worked at Meridian for at least 2 years before disappearing. Rebecca had convinced her boss to hire me after the police refused to investigate. The cop's position was simple. Adults have the right to quit jobs without explanation. Unless there was evidence of foul play, there was nothing to investigate. But Rebecca's instinct told her something was wrong. I started by trying to contact the missing employees. I tracked down phone numbers and addresses for all 8. 3 had disconnected phones. 4 had moved from their last known addresses with no forwarding information. The 8th person, Carla Hodge, still lived at the same address. I went to Carla's apartment in Queens on a Wednesday afternoon. It was a walk-up in a quiet neighborhood. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again and identified myself as a private investigator. The door opened slightly. A woman peered through the gap, chain still on. She looked haggard, older than 45. Dark circles under her eyes. "Carla Hodge?" I asked. "Go away," she said. "I just want to ask you a few questions about Meridian Insurance." The effect was immediate. Her face went pale. She tried to close the door, but I put my foot in the gap. "Please, I just need 5 minutes. Rebecca Torres hired me. She's worried about you." "Rebecca should quit," Carla said, her voice shaking. "Tell her to quit today. Don't wait. Don't do an exit interview. Just leave and never go back." "What happened to you there?" Carla's eyes filled with tears. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." She stared at me for a long moment, then removed the chain and let me in. Her apartment was dark, curtains drawn. The TV was on but muted. Empty coffee cups covered every surface. Carla sat on the couch and wrapped herself in a blanket despite the warm weather. "I worked at Meridian for 4 years," she said. "HR coordinator. I loved that job. Good pay, good benefits, nice coworkers. Everything was normal until about 2 years ago. That's when I started staying late. Why? Budget season. We were understaffed. I'd work until 8 or 9 p.m. sometimes. The office empties out after 6. By 7, it's usually just security and maybe 1 or 2 other people." She paused, gathering herself. "One night I was working late on the 12th floor. That's where HR is. Around 7:30 I needed to use the bathroom. On my way back I passed conference room D. The door was closed, but I heard voices inside. I almost kept walking, but something made me stop. The voices sounded wrong. Scripted, maybe. I can't explain it. What did you do? I looked through the window and the door. The blinds were partially closed, but I could see inside. There were 4 people sitting around the conference table. I recognized them. They all worked at Meridian. David Chen, Amanda Willis, Jerome Foster, and someone I didn't know well. I checked my notes. Chen, Willis, and Foster were all on the list of people who disappeared. What were they doing? I asked. That's the thing, they were just sitting there, staring at empty chairs. Not talking, even though I'd heard voices. They sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table, staring at these empty chairs like they were waiting for something. Maybe it was a meeting at 7:30 p.m. in the dark. The lights were off. Carla nodded. Just the emergency lighting, dim, and they were all wearing their work clothes, their ID badges like it was a normal workday. But their expressions, she shuddered. Blank. Completely blank. Like mannequins. What did you do? I knocked on the door. I don't know why. Should have walked away. But I knocked, and the 4 of them turned to look at me in perfect unison. Same speed, same movement. And they smiled. All of them. The exact same smile. Carla's hands were shaking now. I opened the door and asked if everything was okay. David Chen stood up and said, "We're conducting exit interviews. Would you like to join us?" His voice was flat, emotionless. I said no thank you and left. I practically ran back to my office, grabbed my things, and went home. Did you report it? To who? Security. What would I say? I saw coworkers in a conference room. I convinced myself I'd misunderstood what I'd seen. Maybe it was some kind of late-night team meeting. I tried to forget about it, but you didn't know. Because the next day, all 4 of them were gone. David, Amanda, Jerome, and the 4th person I didn't recognize. They'd stopped coming to work. Just like that, I checked with their departments. No one had heard from them. No resignation emails. Nothing. I wrote all this down, trying to maintain a neutral expression. That's when I started paying attention, Carla continued. Over the next year, it happened 3 more times. I'd stay late, and I'd see different employees in conference room D sitting in the dark, staring at empty chairs. A week later, those same employees would disappear, stop showing up. Did you ever go into the conference room during the day? I asked. Yes, it's a normal conference room. It's a table, chairs, whiteboard, phone, nothing unusual. I checked the reservation system. No one ever officially booked it for evening meetings. Did you tell anyone? I tried. I went to my boss, the head of HR. She said I was working too hard, seeing things because I was stressed. She suggested I take some vacation time, so I did. 2 weeks. When I came back, I promised myself I wouldn't stay late anymore. I'd leave at 5 every day no matter what, but you stayed late again. Carla nodded slowly. 3 months ago was a deadline, a report that absolutely had to be finished. I stayed until 8 p.m. I was the last one on the floor. I was packing up to leave when I heard my name. Someone calling my name from down the hall. Who was it? I walked toward the voice. It was coming from conference room D. The door was open. Inside I saw them, 7 people sitting around the table. All former Meridian employees, the ones who'd disappeared. They turned to look at me, and they all had that same blank smile. David Chen stood up and said, "Carla, we've been waiting for you. It's time for your exit interview. What did you do?" I ran. I grabbed my purse, and I ran for the elevator, which I could hear them behind me walking in perfect synchronization. Not running, walking, but they were getting closer. I made it to the elevator and frantically pressed the button. The doors opened just as they came around the corner. Carla was crying now. As the doors closed, I saw them standing there, 7 people I used to work with, all staring at me with those empty smiles. And behind them, in the conference room, I could see more figures. Shadowy shapes sitting in chairs, Dozens of them. Filling the room. What do you think they were? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I don't know. I don't want to know. All I know is I never went back. I quit via email that night. I never finished my exit interview. I left everything there, my photos, my plants, my favorite mug, and I'm never setting foot in that building again. I asked Carla a few more questions, but she was too shaken to continue. I thanked her for her time and left. My next step was to visit Meridian Insurance. Rebecca had arranged for me to have after-hours access to the 12th floor. I arrived at 7 p.m. on a Friday evening. The office was exactly as you'd expect. Cubicles, fluorescent lights, corporate art on the walls. By 7:15, I was alone. Security had confirmed that everyone else had left. I made my way to conference room D. It was unlocked. I turned on my flashlight. I deliberately left the overhead lights off and entered. Normal conference room. Table for 12, ergonomic chairs, whiteboard with faded marks from old meetings, a speakerphone in the center of the table. I sat down and waited. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. I felt foolish, sitting alone in a dark conference room on a Friday night. Then, at exactly 7:30 p.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Multiple people, walking in unison, getting closer. I stood up and moved to the window and the door. Through the blinds, I saw them. 4 people in business attire, walking side by side down the empty corridor. Their movements were synchronized perfectly. Same stride, same pace. They were heading toward conference room D. I had a choice. Stay and confront them, or leave. Every instinct told me to leave. I left. I ducked into a nearby cubicle and watched from the shadows as the 4 people entered conference room D. I recognized one of them from the photos. Rebecca had shown me Robert Desmond, who'd stopped coming to work 5 months ago. They sat around the conference table in the dark, perfectly still, hands folded, staring at the empty chairs. Then they spoke in unison. Exit interview commencing. I won't tell you what I heard next, because I don't want those words in your head. But I will tell you this. They weren't conducting an interview. They were waiting for someone, calling to someone, and whatever they were calling to was starting to arrive. The temperature in the office dropped. The shadows in conference room D began to move independently of the light source. And I heard something that didn't sound like it came from human throats, a sound that was invitation and threat and promise all at once. I left the building. I went straight to Rebecca's home and told her to quit immediately. No exit interview, no 2 weeks' notice. Just leave and don't go back. Rebecca listened to everything I had to say. She was skeptical but frightened enough by my demeanor to take me seriously. What is it? She asked. What's in that conference room? I don't know. But I think it feeds on people who work late, who stay isolated, who separate themselves from the safety of crowds. And I think the people who've disappeared are helping it, either willingly or because they don't have a choice anymore. Rebecca quit the next day, via email, no exit interview. I tried to warn Meridian's executives, but they dismissed me as a fraud. They said I was trying to create a problem to justify my fee. The last I heard, 2 more employees have disappeared. The company is still operating. People still work on the 12th floor, and conference room D is still there, waiting for the next person who stays too late. This case is the reason I'm very selective now about the jobs I take, because I learned something that I can't unlearn. The places where we spend our lives, our offices, our buildings, our routines, they can become something else, can become traps. And sometimes the exit is one way. If you work somewhere that feels wrong, somewhere that makes you uneasy when you're alone there, trust that feeling. Leave early. Don't stay late. And if anyone ever invites you to an exit interview after hours, in the dark, with people who shouldn't be there, run. That's the end of our series today. 6 cases from my years as a private investigator. 6 stories that changed the way I see the world. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Please like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the dark side of investigation work. I've got plenty more cases in my files, and if there's interest, I'll share them with you. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, not every mystery should be solved. Sometimes the answer is worse than the question. Thanks for watching.